All right, y'all. We are back with another episode of the Brothers-in-Law podcast. Very excited. We got some special guests here today.
Yes.
I'm Imani, your brother-in-law. Got your brother-in-law Conrad over here, and our special guest Phil is joining us.
Good to be here, brothers. Thanks for having me.
For sure. I want to get right to it, but for those who are tuning in for the very first time, here at the Brothers-in-Law podcast, we talk about all things law-related, all things criminal law-related, from your rights to your powers to everything and the like. Today, we're going to have a special episode, and we'll get to it in a few. But before we do that, I just want to do some check-ins, see how we're doing. I have a brief, and I have a life update. You know, I just got engaged. I hate when I say I got engaged because something I got proposed to. But I got engaged last week, so I'm a fiance now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it feels good to be in company like this because my brother's married, so it's motivated to be around black men lawyers that's married and with families, and it's inspiring.
Yeah.
It's nice to be in good company.
No, and it's a good thing, too, just in terms of like making that commitment to like a much longer partnership, right?
Yeah.
I mean, marriage, you always have the foundation of love and, affection and all of those good things. But, getting through this life as a black man, not easy.
Yeah.
When you can kind of have a partner there walking you through the journey.
Yeah.
I don't think we talk about that enough as black men, but it's mandatory if you're trying to do what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Gotta have a good one behind you.
Gotta have a partner, bro.
Yeah.
Life partner.
I think we got to do a black man relationship podcast one day.
There you go.
For sure.
New topic.
That's my life update. Conrad, I know you recently just also had a pretty big win. You want to talk about it real quick? And I got some questions about it, but I want you to just talk about your win first.
Yeah. So I was on trial for about a month almost.
Wow.
My client was charged with attempted murder for shooting at somebody in the middle of the street.
Was it on camera?
So yes and no, right? Like the facts are kind of crazy. Okay. So like my client pulls up to the scene. He walks past the complainant. You see him on video, turn around. The video is 4K. It's like clear as day. You can't mistake my client. You can't mistake who he is. So our defense couldn't be Miss ID, really.
Yeah, I missed those early 2000s with the nice grainy video. Those are the good old days.
Nah, these videos are problematic. This was like professional photographer video. Like the person catching Spider-Man on a building type video. So a client turns around, points at the CW, walks up to the CW. CW is a man who's struggling with addiction, and he is doing what you would think people struggling with addiction is doing. He's out
getting
in the streets, getting high in the middle of the night, selling stuff for $5 with cans of stuff.
Yeah.
So the client turns around, kicks his stuff, follows CW into the street. They seem to get in an argument. The argument escalates. Client follows CW into the street. The video is still clear at this point. And then they go behind some cars.
Yeah.
And here's where the video gets unclear. So they go behind cars and go into the middle of the street. And there's another camera angle that captures whatever's happening next, but you really can't make out what's going on. It's two individuals in the middle of the street. It's just like two small figures. You can't really see what's what. And at one point, you see an individual keel over.
Right? Now, I want you to tell Phil what your theory was. This is crazy.
So, like I told you, we can't go miss ID because it's clear our client was on the scene. It's clear that our client was in an argument with the CW.
He's there.
And it's clear that there's only two people in the middle of the street when a shot is allegedly fired. And so our defense was, Plaxico Burress?
Yes. Shot himself.
Cheddar Bob? Yes, he shot himself.
Now, mind you, Plaxico had to do 2 years for that.
He
for
did.
Shooting himself.
He did.
So you're doing even better.
And that was our motive to fabricate. That was our theory of CW's motive to fabricate. He had a long rap sheet, so he knew if he got caught with a gun or he knew that he had to tell the police I was trying to shoot somebody else. I shot myself accidentally. He knew he would have to do some time. And so his motive to lie and point the finger at our client was just that.
I love it.
So
I love it. Good job.
Acquitted on all charges. Crazy.
How long had he been in? Or am I presuming he was in?
He got out on an ankle monitor. He was out on an ankle monitor for 2 years.
Oh, shout out bail reform.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it was like 2 years ago, years ago, he'd have been in the whole time for sure.
He would have taken the plea by now.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd have taken the
plea. If he was in, he might have.
He'd have done a deal.
I don't know. This client was gully. I don't know. He was with it. He was like, I don't give a. He's like, I'm taking it to trial. I'm like, bro, you could get 25. I'm like, if you go down, you're getting at least 8.
Yeah. And what was the offer?
So the offer had always been 8.
Sounds about right.
There was an under-the-table offer of 4, but I don't think the DA was ever really serious.
Which is below the minimum.
The minimum was 5. Mandatory minimum was 5. And so the DA went just one below because she knows it's like kind of sweetening the pot, but not enough for somebody to jump at it. Because you could just ask the judge for 5 if you wanted to.
Right.
Because he wasn't a pred. Meaning he didn't have a felony record really that would affect him. So
good work, brother.
Appreciate you.
There's two things I want to highlight from this. First thing is, I know a lot of people will look at the trial and be like, Bronx jurors got that case off. But I want to make sure you feel like you did that work. You lawyered it. It's yes, Bronx jurors probably helped, but also you lawyered the hell out of that case. So be proud of the work you did, because I saw it from voir dire all the way down to the closing argument. You did that thing.
I appreciate you, bro.
Yes,
big coming from you.
The second thing I wanted to say is, watching his trial was the first time I ever felt conflicted as a public defender ever. Like, I've watched people cross-examine, rape victims. I've watched people cross-examine children.
Tell me.
But this CW, I looked at him and I just saw half of my clients. It was a brown guy who really clearly had been struggling with addiction his entire life.
Yeah.
And I just imagined cross-examining some of my most, dear clients that I have in my life that are struggling and addicted. So I was like, yo, this is the first time I was like, and to make matters worse is his client was white. So it's like,
he was lying.
White pat.
But he was white. He was white.
He looked white to me. So it was like, we get into this work largely because, partially because of racism, and we want to make sure we're representing the people who are most marginalized and vulnerable. But here we are with someone who is, looks to be a part of, the majority, and looks to be a part of, white culture. You're representing him, and the person he victimizes represents the demographic of people that we actually do represent. Was there any conflict there for you?
Yeah, there was a big conflict, bro.
You
could ask my co-counsel Greg at the time when we were gearing up for cross.
Stankiewicz?
No, Herrera.
Okay.
Herrera.
Okay.
When we were gearing up for cross, man, we said the same thing. It was like, this guy could be half of our client list. Like, this complainant could be half of our client list. And so it was tough preparing that cross because part of destroying this guy's credibility, his believability, was pointing out his criminal record, right? His history. Because that was such a big reason why we were saying he was lying to the cops about what happened.
Right.
And it just, part of it felt nasty kind of doing it. But, the other part of me was like, look, I'm a prison abolitionist and I don't agree with what the potential punishment could be for my client, right? And if this is the way to avoid that punishment, then this is what I have to do, right? And to me, I kind of put it back on this is the prosecutor's fault.
Yeah.
For forcing this complainant to have to get on the stand and relive this, right? She could have just given my client a deal that my client was going to take.
Right.
And she wouldn't do it. And so I kind of had to divorce myself from that. And this is the system's fault, right? This is the system's failure. This is why this is not a system that, is capable of handling this kind of thing, capable of addressing these kinds of harms, because it's making us do things like this. It's making us traumatize people. So.
Yeah, but it's like when people can try to use the system as a further sword or as a weapon as against whoever they have a gripe with. Clearly in this situation, the CW had a gripe with your client. It goes both ways. I mean, clearly in the Bronx, been in that situation a couple of times at trial where you're cross-examining people that they were legal aid clients, right? They may have even been clients at Bronx Defenders at some point, but maybe a conflict is waived because it was so long, right? It's just, when you're looking at those records, most likely your office represented that person before. Right. And now you got to start exploring all of these convictions. But at the end of the day, it's to your point, what's the alternative? My client's going to go to jail. And I think also foundationally, it's also good too, because, once you kind of start, let's presume you branch out, you start getting into federal practice. I mean, this is going to be day in, day out in terms of when you're cross-examining all these cooperating witnesses, they all got crazy records for the most part, right? When you're talking about people that are being brought out from these gangs and cooperating with the government to try to get lesser time on these conspiracy counts, you're going to be cross-examining people that have those kinds of records that you're going to have to go hard on in a way for the sole purpose of making sure your client isn't doing a 10-year mandatory minimum or a 20-year mandatory minimum. You know what I mean? So it's not easy, but it's a good learning lesson because it's a skill you're going to need and an ability that you're going to have to be able to tap into when it comes to saving your own clients at times. And you just did it. So good work.
Appreciate that.
Congrats, man. It was an honor just to watch you do your work. And we started working at the same time 7 years ago at the Bronx Defenders. So we've been through it the whole time. It's nice to see you at this stage, bro.
I appreciate it, man.
Congrats.
All right, so let's pivot. We got a OG in the room. Phil, your name and reputation precedes itself. I think you had left before we got there, but when we got there, many people were talking about you and was like, "Hey, man, Phil was a great figure here, great representation of black male lawyers and black male supervisors here." So
that's heartwarming to know.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Because you don't necessarily set out to be like that, but you stay on your principles.
Yeah.
So if that's the legacy I left, I'm very grateful for that.
And it's still there to this day, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, so I want you to introduce yourself real quick. I want to know where you're from and what brought you to doing the work that you do.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, originally born in LA, but none of my family was West Coast. We were all, for the most part, on my mom's side of the family in Detroit. So after her and my dad tried raising me out there for a little bit, really with no help, didn't work out, moved back to Detroit when I'm like 1, right? And so, coming up there, Midwest roots, dealing with like a city that, I always tell people like we're all growing up with like our grandparents that have, having come from, Georgia and Alabama and just they wanted more, right? If it wasn't our grandparents, it was our great-grandparents. Detroit's just an interesting city because you have all these people that just fled what we not going to deal with, right? In terms of like Jim Crow, segregation, lack of opportunity, came up there for a lot of the opportunities that, centered around clearly the auto industry. But then from there also became like a lot of business opportunities. You're coming up there to work in the auto industry. Somebody needs to cut your hair. Somebody maybe needs to make sure that, you got food. Somebody needs to maybe make sure that, you have daycare, right? So like a whole economy, like centered around like all these Black people coming from the South to Detroit. My great grandmother had actually invested in like a boarding house after she worked in like white people's homes for a while, saved up some money, cleaning their homes, taking care of their kids, got a boarding home. And then like a lot of the other people that were starting to come from the South, like boom, now you got a place to stay when you first get there, get your feet wet, yada, yada, yada. So it's a very kind of hustling, entrepreneurial type city from jump, right? Like from like the Black experience there from jump. And it's just really in large parts like in the DNA of the city, of the people. I always look at sometimes like Black people from the Caribbean and like the way in which they come up and you hear them talk at times, like they don't necessarily see as much Black and white because the country's just theirs. If you're from St. Kitts, if you're from Jamaica, if you're from whatever, you just see yourself. And then white people are just kind of like the others that are there. Clearly, Detroit is a very segregated city, so I can't say that I didn't see race. I mean, you think about the 67 riots and the legacy from that. Clearly, race is a part of Detroit. But at the same time, you just grow up seeing a lot of like Black lawyers, doctors, federal judges. Marvin Gaye's house was around the corner from my grandma's house, right? Motown, all the just entrepreneurial like legacy and hustle there. It's just a huge part of who I am and how I came up. And when my parents split when I was 10, my father came back here to New York, all right? Kew Gardens, Queens, Forest Hills kind of area. And basically the way it kind of worked out was if I wasn't in school with their custody agreement, I was here. So in a weird kind of way, I grew up between Detroit and Kew Gardens, Queens, right? But it was great perspective to have. You talk about, again, like the Black entrepreneurial side that I saw coming up back home. And then when I got here, just seeing different levels of diversity. You just talked about it, Conrad, in terms of like, all right, you got this white passing Latino client that I remember when I was a kid coming here to Queens and, I'd have these Black people like Wesley Snipes' complexion coming up to me speaking Spanish. It was something that was very weird. I didn't see that in Detroit, right? The only people that spoke Spanish were, the Mexican Americans that lived in Southwest Detroit. I didn't see Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, the African diaspora like in the Latin world. I didn't see any of that. So I used to love that about New York, right? And I always longed to come here like every summer, once I was out of school, had my network here, yada, yada, yada. And as much as I saw the diversity here, the only thing I think I didn't see was, again, I'm accustomed to Black mayors, Black prosecutors, like the system weirdly coming up in Detroit. It didn't take on the face that sometimes it takes here. So you talk about the Bronx jurors, right? And you was like, this wasn't a Bronx juror trial. This was like a hard fought trial. But the thing I think sometimes that makes Bronx jurors, no matter where they are, like whether they're in the Bronx or if it's like a Southern District case in Manhattan Federal Court where you have Bronx jurors, generally here in New York, the prosecution, the judges, like a lot of times, like it just does take on like a white face, right? Like the system takes on a us versus them kind of face. It didn't really take that on in Detroit as hard because a lot of the judges are Black. The prosecution is Black. So I'm not going to say that there was as much like antipathy between like the sides. There was like kind of like more of a communal type of, we're kind of not, I'm not gonna say we're in this together, but I am gonna say there just wasn't like that tension of us versus them as much. You could have a relationship with a prosecutor, right? Like you can have a relationship with a judge because you guys are seeing each other at church. Right. You guys are seeing each other like outside at other events, right? So, you know, that was like a huge foundation there. But like in New York, yeah, the system took on more of like a face, a traditional face. And then also I didn't really see like a lot of entrepreneurial, like stakeholder power.
Right.
That would belong to people of color here. Even though there were so many more people of color here than there, I just didn't see us in power positions. Yeah. So when I came to law school, I went to Cardozo. You know, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I was thinking something Thurgood Marshall-esque, right? Am I going to go in NAACP LDF? Am I going to do, you know, civil rights work? Am I going to be a trial attorney like him? I didn't really know. Johnny Cochran, clearly, of course, too. That's like a big part of my coming up because the OJ trials when I'm 12, 13. Wow. And I'm just like, all right, it's going to be something of that ilk. Let's go to law school. Go to law school, start to develop my network, you know, did a internship at the Federal Defenders for the Eastern District of Michigan, the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia. And then through like a lot of the networks I met there, came back here, did criminal defense clinic my third year. Okay. And then through Professor Oberman at Cardozo, I was introduced basically to Robin Steinberg, right? Who was, you know, our former COO at Bronx Defenders and who founded it for, you know, all intents and purposes. And then, you know, coming out of like graduating in 2009 when we know that the market crashed in 2008, you know, thank God I had a lot of those relationships and, you know, Robin took a big chance on me and, you know, I came to BXD in the fall of 2009.
That was your first job out of law school?
That was my first job out of law school.
Got you.
Right? I'm there for 6 years. So like you said, I preceded you guys by like a couple of years, right? Because I left in May of 15 and I left in May of 15 after, you know, basically feeling pretty confident in my practice, man. I had, you know, tried a number of cases, you know, like yourself. I had tasted victory. I had walked a lot of clients through, you know, some very risky, troubling times, right? That like could have affected the rest of their life or at least the next 5 to 25 years of it with certain offenses I was dealing with and trying to protect them from convictions from. Yeah. So by May of 2015, man, my son had been born the year before. Remember, BXD had a very progressive paternity policy. Right. Yeah. So still does. It's even more progressive now. It's even more. Right. But I was gone for maybe like, I don't know, I guess it was like a 6 or 8 week something that I took. And I just remember like week 3 or week 4 just being like, man, I'm really enjoying this time with my son. I had a caseload at that time of like 110, 111, something like that. And I think the thought of like going back in that fall of 2014, I was a little conflicted because I had put in at that point 5 years. And I was just like, I can't do, I think, another 5 years of 110 cases per, you know, quarter that I'm carrying. I think at this point I want to make a move. But I loved what I did. I like trying cases. You know, I liked the work, the advocacy. And so that's when I started kind of just talking to some of like the private defense bar, right? The Xavier Donaldsons, the Jason Foys, you know, even at a certain point, like talking to Judge Yearwood, right? Who he's chief administrative judge in Bronx State Supreme Court now. Right. But, you know, he was in private practice at one point, right? So I'm like just talking to them about what does it look like? How much money can you make? Was it fulfilling? Yada, yada, yada. And like once I found out that they were all kind of making some bread, number one, that they were still, we always saw them in court doing their thing. I would see X in court trying cases or what have you. And I'm like, man, this brother's like dope, right? Like, and he didn't come up from BXD, but it was another perspective that maybe I didn't necessarily have at BXD that taught me like I can come out, do my thing, run a business, make some money, but control more of my own time. So that was May of 15. I left, started a little solo litigation boutique on 50th and 6th, handling primarily a lot of white collar professionals that were getting caught up in like blue collar crimes, right? So basically like what you just tried, right? Like imagine like an executive CPA getting charged with attempted murder in the Bronx. I actually had a case like that in 2019 and we went to trial on that, right?
I remember that actually.
Remember that trial?
Yes, I remember it,
Yep. And I was doing the same thing in that case because the CW in that case was a dude that hustled like on 155th and Girard. My client is like a corporate exec that like went to high school with LeBron James and at St. Vincent St. Mary's and had like, you know, magna cum laude, Ohio State. She had a master's degree and, you know, had gotten in some things. Some things happened. She ended up on trial for attempted murder. And she is not in jail. She actually just graduated law school. Shout out to her.
Wow.
And is doing some big things in policy back in the Midwest, right? But I'm just saying, like, that was like my specialty, right? Like dealing with the white collar professionals that get involved in the type of stuff that we dealt with, like in the Bronx. I was the guy. And so everybody was like kind of sending those cases to me. Started like, handling some, civil rights matters here or there, just, getting some hits, some settlements.
Yeah.
And by 2020, had built up enough revenue that I was about to make like a really heavy investment in the firm.
Mm-hmm.
And around that time, me and Lance Clarke, my partner, kind of came together because his firm was dissolving. And I was just like, well, in lieu of making this investment just in mine, kind of like when like LeBron and D-Wade came together.
Right.
And like they had two options.
Uh-huh.
They could keep battling each other in the Eastern Conference.
Right.
One of them was going to win and go to the finals, right? Whether that was going to be Miami or whether that was going to be Cleveland. Or, hey, what if we just join in Miami?
And
we going to the finals every year, right? We already got that part knocked out.
Right.
And so I think because me and Lance shared like circles, and it's just like, if you saw Lance last week, you're going to refer the case to him. But if you saw me yesterday and I'm fresh in your mind, you're going to refer it to me.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, let's just consolidate our networks and then like build from like collectively being a part of a team. That was 2020. And my brothers, we like 4 years in now. We're representing some, Fortune 50 companies as like regional counsel. Wow. We are still continuing to do like a lot of like the high level, like white collar practice, dealing with like a lot of executives and still that niche that I was talking to you about. That's still a big one for me and Lance. Like when people within power want things to kind of go away, they'll call us. We've built like a nice commercial division, civil rights division, and we continue to build. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Wow.
I'll let you take it back.
Congrats.
Got so many different questions.
I know.
Lance is also a black man.
Correct.
The majority of your firm is also people of color. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, Lance is Brooklyn born and raised. Okay. I know he would want me to shout that out. So 100%. And then I would say the firm is actually pretty diverse. And that's like extremely intentional on our part, especially since, look, man, you don't particularly, again, we in New York, we're not in Houston, Atlanta, Detroit, DC, Chicago. We're not like in those traditional chocolate cities, at least as concerns what I was talking about earlier, business entrepreneurship, right? And so I think, like, let's say for Lance, like growing up in Brooklyn, we always talk about there's a lot of that stuff I saw in Detroit that he just never saw growing up, right? I mean, New York is so economically like stratified and segregated, like amongst like class more so I think than any other city I've ever seen in my life, right? Like 100% on that. So for him, he didn't see it, he wanted it. For me, I grew up seeing what we're doing and I'm just like, it can be done here, right? Like somebody's got to do it. And so like that's where we kind of meshed. And so since we meshed on that, like we've just built out a firm that can provide like sophisticated legal services to whether you are a corporate client, whether you're a white collar executive, or just, I mean, we still do like a lot of CJA panel work. We're on the 18B panel. So we're still doing like a lot of the cases just that you just tried, Conrad. Like we still there too. Like those roots haven't been forgotten. But we built it out super diverse and just continuing to grow it day by day.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. I thought your firm was only criminal defense and now I'm hearing it's a lot more than that. You grew it out more than criminal defense. That's dope.
Yeah. I mean, the other stuff just kind of helps keep the bills paid.
Yeah.
A little bit easier, right? The criminal defense like still just remains like more of like the heart's passion. You know what I'm saying? For like a lot of like what we're doing. But when you're building a business, right? Like you have to kind of like diversify. Like you have to like figure out areas where you can provide a service and where you can be of service to the market. And that's an area where as we started to do this, especially in 2020, with all the stuff that was going on like around that time, there was really no better time for us to have come together, built this out, worked our relationships, the excitement that was centering around what we were doing, and like substantively us being able to deliver. It wasn't like some gimmicky type stuff like, hey, black firm 2020, send everything to us. Like that's not going to happen unless they know that you can deliver. That's anyone, right? And I think that's sometimes like things that we don't talk about, right? Like in terms of just like you come out on the business side and no matter how many crazy cases you've won and how like crazy your theories have been like to thread through how to win this trial or how to do this, how to do that, you come out and you still have a concern about like, are these people going to want to hire me because I'm black, right? Or are they going to more stereotypically, and I'm talking about our people. Let's just start with black people, right? Are they more, think about people who are in the news right now, right? I need a Jewish attorney, right? I need a white guy, right? Like I need this, I need that. And like that's something that like Lance and I had to navigate when we came out. But the interesting thing is, like, we kind of centered our market more toward like progressive, like super intellectuals that have an understanding that it's not just about like some baseline, I need a Jewish attorney. It's just like, I need this specific attorney because he has this skill set that will operate well in front of this potential jury pool or this judge or this adversary, or like can come to the negotiating table like on any of our civil and commercial matters with an interesting angle that we need for leverage, right? Like we have just like developed our market toward like super smart people, right? Because they can see past all of it and they can see where your value is, as opposed to some people like that may even have a lot of money, but are just like, well, I'm in trouble now, so I need this.
Right.
That's not really our client. That's not our market. That's not our market.
Got you. All right, well, I got a few questions. My first is, I'm at a point in my career, also 7 years now. I think I've decided that I don't want to be a PD for life. I don't know what that next step looks like.
And that's okay. That's okay. Like, that's another part of the conversation.
I'm trying to convince myself that, because I feel like when we're in the PD, when you're in a PD siloed world, it's like, if you're not doing this work, then you're selling out. And it's like, you just feel that pressure to keep doing it.
You do.
So I'm at a point to where I know, like, I just got engaged. I want to have a family. And I don't believe I'll be able to have the lifestyle that I want to have, you know, on a PD salary. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I convince myself it's okay to leave this work? And yeah, that's my first question. Like, I don't know what that next step looks like. I've thought about maybe academia. I've thought about going private. I've thought about many different options. And it just feels so hard. And I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how to think through that process.
Yeah, just before you answer, I want to validate you, because like we started at the same time and we're coming to the same realization at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think there's just, you know, there's something there that you just like at a certain point, you just know it. Like, you know,
my initial goal was to be here 3-5 years and then like figure out what next steps. And now I've doubled my intention of being here. And now I'm like, I want to leave. How do I leave? And how am I okay with leaving?
Yeah.
Imani, how old are you?
31.
How old are you, Conrad?
I just turned 32.
All right, so you good. So yeah, when I left BXD, I was 32. I was about to be 33, right? So now that I'm 41, about to be 42 next month, I guess just looking at you brothers, you're doing it right. You've done it right. You've put in the time. I'm going to say something I think we didn't really talk about a lot, like we all knew and could see. When you're there and you're thinking about like, I'm selling out, like there's like a whole like culture there that's like, we're in the fight, right? Like we're here for the people, we're here for our clients, right? And like if we're not doing that and like going to either sell out for money or going to do something else, like then you're not doing your part as a Black man, right? Like you're not doing your part as a public defender, right? As a grassroots fighter and advocate for, you know, those who are not as privileged, right? Or don't have the resources to be able to fight for themselves. But let me tell you guys this. There were a lot of people, they had husbands that worked in finance. They came from families that had a lot of money, right? Where they could kind of come in and do one of two things. Either offset their guilt about a lot of the privilege that they had by coming into the community and doing work for, and thank God that they were there, like fighting for a lot of the Black and brown people within the community. So I'm not taking anything away from them.
Right.
But I am setting up circumstances that it's a little bit easier when your husband works at a, you know, for Goldman Sachs, right? Or he's at BlackRock, or he's at some hedge fund that is allowing you to live in Tribeca while you come up to the Bronx and like do all of the good work that you can do for 15 or 20 years because you're good, right? Or if you come from a family where your father or your grandfather was at BlackRock or somewhere deep in finance, that you come from a lot of money and you can do that work for 10, 15, 20 years at the salary that a public defender pays. Fantastic. And I'm glad you can do it, right? Keep fighting the good fight. When it comes for a lot of us, if you don't necessarily come from them resources and you're trying to build something for like the next generation, you can't feel bad about being ready to make the next move. You've put in the work for your people, right? You've put in the work for your people in a way that other people who aren't your people just never can. And I'll say it, they never can, right? You're always going to be an advantage when it comes to like that advocacy, because there's something that like you culturally understand. There's a language there that you get because you've lived it and you've experienced it. Even if you didn't grow up in the South Bronx, like just being of color, like we come up so fluid, right? You might have like your rich bougie aunt and uncle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also got like the other uncle and cousins that, you know, live on the east side, right? Or that, right? That like we're very fluid. So like we know how to navigate like with each other. So even if you're not from the South Bronx, you're able to give to them in a way that you have amazingly for the last 7 years. And if it's time for you to go and you're feeling that, then it's time for you to go, because like you feeling like it's time to go, but then you're staying there because you don't want to be a sellout is you not giving 100% to your clients anymore.
Mm.
If there's a part of you that's feeling like you want to dip. And I think that was my thing in 2014 when I told you I was like at home with my son, my newborn son. And I was just like, I don't know if I fully want to be there. And if I don't have the feeling of like, I'm in this for the fight, I'm still learning, I'm still like acquiring knowledge, I'm still advocating. If like that passion is not there, that's when it's time to go. That's when it's time to start thinking about the next move.
It's good to hear. I feel like the two of us have like tried to do things to keep ourselves there. Like he now does policy work while also doing, you know, his own caseload. I shifted to supervising, which I love as well, to try to also find a different way to keep myself there. Like now I'm on year 3 supervising, you're still doing your thing. And it's like, all right, I think I've maximized what I want to do here. And it's time to start getting the courage. So
I mean, look at what you're doing here, right? Just like the creative, like think through to do something like this, right? To like fulfill your creative desires, to fulfill like the what's next kind of step. Like you're manifesting right now, like doing something like this, like you never know where these kinds of things can lead. You know what I mean? Like it's just, it's okay. It's okay.
I mean, part of it's like really hard for me because like, you know, I grew up in the projects, right? And like,
and where are you from, Conrad?
I'm from Miami.
From Miami, okay.
But like most of my formative years were in Tallahassee-ish.
Okay.
And it's just like, you know, I've seen the kinds of things that my clients have gone through. I've lived some of what they've gone through. Like I have friends who doing 15 years for shooting at the cops and stuff. You know, and like part of me is just like, I have this unique perspective and like, I feel like morally obligated to do this work because I have that unique perspective. And like part of me feels bad for leaving, you know, if I do leave, for leaving and not utilizing that perspective where it can help. And then like we were saying, like we were talking about, the flip side of it is because I grew up in the projects, I grew up with no money for I grew up poor most of my life, you know, single parent. I lived with only my mom. And like, I feel like I owe it to myself to better myself in life and set my kids up for a future that I didn't have, even though like I still made it here. Shout out to Ma Dukes because I had a good mom. And you know, that's what tears at me, man. It's just like I have this perspective and I feel like I should give it, you know? So like I don't know how to reconcile or deal with that.
You gave your time, man. I mean, one of the things I think you asked earlier, and I may have skirted around it, but just like where did my obligation like for public defense come, right? And it's just like, well, my cousin had went through something pretty scary in like 1990, 1991. And we'll just leave it at there was an indictment in the Eastern District of Michigan that I remember, you know, going to, you know, my granny's house and he's got the ankle monitor on. I'm like 8. I don't know what that is, right? But like he's kind of tethered to the house, like waiting for that whole like pretrial like phase to play out. He ends up retaining Steve Fishman, who in like Detroit pantheon of like criminal defense attorneys, particularly coming out of like that kind of crack money era, which was like very bad. I mean, if you looked at like any of the BMF stuff, like me, there was a lot of money in Detroit around that time. And a lot of it, because of how it was coming in, was filtering to like criminal defense attorneys. Steve Fishman was at the top, right? And he really helped my cousin navigate out of that situation. There was like a big suppression hearing that he came out on the other side, getting some things suppressed and was able to just kind of like go on with his life, right? And after I saw his life saved like that, that's when I think I started to get that interest in criminal defense. And from like a public defense standpoint, I mean, I don't know, it like, I looked at it like, all right, my cousin, because of like a lot of how my family had worked, was able to get Fishman. There's a lot of people that can't, right? So there was like let me go in, help my people. Also, I can learn how to be really good, like how you just won that trial. I can learn these foundational things that can help me be like a Fishman. Then when there comes some point where like maybe I want to transition into something more lucrative, let's not keep it in any way siloed. Yes, you're helping all the people like of the South Bronx, but don't think that like there aren't Black and brown people with bread out there that don't need help as well, because it is so like difficult for us to get to the top that sometimes like when people like my cousin or, you know, other, let's just say like middle to upper middle class, like Black or brown people get into little situations, right? It can be more devastating for the community when you have someone that's like kind of made their way all the way up and the system's now going to like drag them down, right? So there's a market still even there for you to provide your services to people of that ilk as well, right? Like our people like of that ilk, because they're just important as the rest of us, right? In this like whole journey. So it's kind of just something to, you know, think about. But in terms of like you two, again, like thinking that like maybe it's time to make a move, like you have so much more, I think, to like offer, like just looking at you two and speaking with you two right now to this world, to people of color of this world, that if, and that's a big qualifier, if you are starting to think that maybe it's time, right, then I'm letting you know it might be time. Because like if you're having that little thing in the back of your mind, are you 100% fully there in a way that you were 3 or 4 years ago? And if you're not, you might be doing a disservice, and it may just be time to pass the torch. Clearly, even though I didn't know you two, the torch was passed. I left, you two came on, you picked that up. I did my time. Like I gave, I held out and like fulfilled my obligations as we discussed. You two have done that too.
I receive.
I don't know if you, like when we started, I'm pretty sure we both thought we were going to be PD lifers. Like we were both dyed in the wool.
I didn't come into this work like knowing I want to be PD for life, but like I came into this work knowing I like doing this, and I'm not leaving until something pulls me away. But yeah, I wanted to do it as long as I could.
Got it.
I think the time is ticking. I want to shift a little bit into all right. So I think I am processing how I can get to the decision to leave. And, you know, I think starting my own shop may be a possibility for me. What was the process for you, like, you know, starting your own firm and now managing your own firm? What was that process like?
I mean, basically in 2014, shout out to the crew that I was supervising at Bronx Defenders at that time, because I used to call them, they were just like a bunch of like self-sufficient cats. They were amazing attorneys, right? Robin and Justine had just gifted me an amazing team. And so I'm prefacing with that to say that like in 2014, going into 2015, I was just doing a lot of research. I was having a lot of meetings with like people that were in the private defense bar, people who had been in private practice, judges at the state Supreme Court level, at the appellate division level, just any and everyone that was like in the network. So, you know, I'm on the board of directors for the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. I was not of New York. I was not at the time, but I was like pretty active. So I'm just talking to a lot of other like Black lawyers that are outside the PD world as well, just trying to learn more about the business of law, which is something that like, just keep it a buck. Even like everybody that went to Cravath and Skadden, there was really very few classes in law school that taught us anything about the business of law. They just taught us how to be lawyers, right? They just taught us how to go work for other people. They taught us like that. I teach now like a business of law seminar at Cardozo for that exact like purpose, right? But I had to go learn about it. I had to go learn about the business. I had to go learn about like how much money do you guys make? How do you make money? How do you keep clientele coming in? How do you define your market? How do you make sure that like as a Black attorney in a non-Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta type city that people will hire you, right? Like all of these kinds of things was my 2014, 2015. And I was able to do that because the team that I was supervising, they were so competent and like self-sufficient that like they didn't need me like coddling them day in, day out. Like we were always in touch like all day, every day. And I'm not saying I didn't come to work, but just keep it 100. Like in 2014, 2015, I was doing like just a lot of research to figure out how do I build this? What are the first steps I need to make? How much money do I need to make in terms of an investment into like starting this up and all of like those things that like is across, you know, business like industry, right? Across areas. My cousin, my other cousin, he runs a graphic design business in Southeastern Michigan that literally was started out of like my auntie's basement on the west side of Detroit. All right. And like going down to like Atlanta in 1998 to Freaknik to sell like t-shirts with like printed, you know, CD covers, or to actually sell like bootleg CDs or like whatever. And like we used to like, you know, do that, come back, all kinds of like money from like, again, the hustle. And, you know, just watching him build that business out of my auntie's basement, which is now like a regularly 7 to 8 figure grossing business in Southeastern Michigan with like a lot of corporate accounts, gave me a lot of like the foundation I needed to understand like what needed to be done. So that's why I did so much like market research in 2014, 2015. Mm-hmm. And by the spring of 2015, I felt ready to make that jump, and I did.
Mm. Okay. I guess my second question is, I think one of the scary parts for me for leaving and doing something new is like all I know is criminal defense.
Yeah.
And it seems like you have, broadened your scope of representation and broadened your scope of what you do. And that also feels scary. Like learning over again, I'm at a point where I feel really good at, representing misdemeanor and felony cases. Like how did you approach like having to learn new things and then becoming experts in new things and enough to represent people and doing other things outside of what you grew up learning how to do?
So one of the things my cousin with the graphic design business always taught me was like, Phil, you don't need to know how to do everything. You need to make sure you know everyone that can help you get everything done, right? Like it's about like your network, right? So clearly, I mean, look, in law school, let's just start with this. We were taught how to be lawyers, like I just said, right? We passed the bar, which was not only criminal defense, right? It was a very like extremely diverse like bar as concerns like subject areas within law. Mm-hmm. You took all kinds of classes, whether it was con law, contracts, corporations, whatever you took in law school to get your credit, you took it, you made it, right? Mm-hmm. So clearly the capacity is there. Now, yes, you have focused your practice in terms of like becoming a high level criminal defense attorney. But when you come out, on day one, are you going to be like a high level commercial litigator? No, right? Like, but like maybe there's some smaller cases that come that you can like spend some time like getting yourself up to speed on like what the law says, like how to approach, distinguishing your client's facts from, where the law may be adverse to your client. Like all the things that you do right now, you're still doing like as a lawyer. But like, let me just be more frank here. Like when you're building a business, and like this was the point that like Lance and I had gotten to, that's the whole reason like any big law firm is just basically a bunch of like solo firms that have come together. I don't care if it's Skadden, I don't care if it's Paul Weiss. It's like every partner, right, that is like in an office is basically running a solo law practice at Paul Weiss or at Cravath, right? And they've all come together to kind of like utilize and maximize their collective talent. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that like Lance and I realized, let's just start bringing in partners that specialize in these other areas, right? We can manage the relationships with our clients, whether they're corporate clients or whether they're like individual clients or whatever, which is like a skill I think that Lance and I like have really well. Mm-hmm. But just it's a team. We were talking about this a few weeks ago, like Black men, like we're always, for whatever reason, raised to just think like we got to do everything by ourselves, right? Yeah. Like it's like you got to be self-made, you got to do it like Jay and like all these people, but Jay didn't do this by himself. Yeah. Nobody that like reaches these kinds of levels does this by themselves. So to answer your question, like how you start to approach like other areas of law and be able to execute at a high level is, one, your own intellectual capacity to like learn and to like dive into other areas that may not be as comfortable and as well known as what you guys practice now, but also just making sure you have the right network.
Got you.
You got the people that can get you answers like in how do I approach this judge or this case or this issue that have been doing that for as long as you guys have been doing public defense, right?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I guess somewhat relatedly, my question is, have you dealt with imposter syndrome and how do you deal with it, right? Like being a Black man in this type of work, coming from where I come from, like in the back of my mind, there's always that you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have made it here. How'd you make it here? You're not as equal as these other people who've had these other paths to success in life, right? And like, because of that, you're not as good as them. Like, how have you dealt with that and how do you deal with it?
100%. But part of like the navigating that, it comes from like living more life. That's why I asked how old you guys were a little earlier. So if you're both like in your early 30s, what starts to happen is like you get a win like you just got, when'd you get that win? This past week? Yesterday?
Yeah, last week.
All right.
Yeah.
So you just got that win. Like you start to like add those things up and like you start to know like, no, I'm not an imposter. Like I'm doing this. Like I literally just watched my client walk out that courtroom, right? Like I literally just helped, this client avoid this, or like the more success that you have, the less you feel like an imposter, right? You got to touch success. I think on the private business side, like I've said this, there are just certain times in business, if you do it right, it's always going to be no different than like kind of like that stock market, like, you know, graph where it's like going like this, right? Like if you're doing it right. Now, mind you, if you go like this, when you have that dip sucks. It doesn't matter if you've been like this because you never know, is it going to be the final dip, right? But what I will say is that there have just been times where like I've looked in the bank account, right? Or I've seen like a retainer hit, or I've seen, you know, some fees from like a corporate client get paid after we've had like crazy amounts of success for them. And I take a look at that and just with every dollar, there's less imposter syndrome because it's like, this isn't a gimmick. This isn't BS. This is everything I've done over the course of like these 41 years that has gotten me to this place where I'm having these successes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like just the more of that you get, the less the imposter stuff.
Got you.
The more the imposter stuff will go away.
Got you.
In my experience.
Like when I hit on my parlay, you know?
Yeah. You did that. You did. And now maybe, you know, Lamar Jackson ran the route he was supposed to run, or you know what I'm saying? Like he saw that option, but you did that. Yeah.
Got you. We don't have too much time left. I'm curious what a day-to-day like is as a managing partner at your firm. I know like for us, we're in court half the week, maybe all week. If we're not in court, we're in the office preparing to be back in court. So what would you say an average day-to-day like for you is throughout a week as a managing partner at your firm?
A lot of communication with a lot of people. Okay. Like I deal with so many people on a given day. I have so many people like texting me that I'm constantly having to get back to like, hey, sorry, I didn't like, you know, get back yesterday, da-da-da-da-da. It's just like a shit ton of communication of people that need things from you, that need updates, that need advice, that need guidance, that need your expertise, having to make sure everything's good on I mean, look, you still do delegate this, right? Right. But even with the delegation, you have to be over, if we're talking about like accounting, if we're talking about HR, like especially as you have like a smaller litigation boutique, you touch a lot more things, right? And so like literally, like Imani, like in my notes in my phone, anytime like I have a thought, what I have gotten to this place of doing is I write it down in my notes. If there's something that comes on my mind that like I'm supposed to do, like I'm supposed to get back to you to check in to make sure that like I'm gonna be here on time. Like I put it in my notes. And then like usually like every 4 to 6 hours, I'm just going in my notes and making sure like I'm working through the things I need to do. Like I can't remember everything that I have to do anymore because it's so much. Right. So like being a managing partner is just, it's a lot, but it's my own a lot. It's not someone else's a lot. It's not me making someone else rich a lot. It's me setting my own destiny, and it's me setting my own path a lot. And that's a lot that I can deal with. As long as like I always make sure that like I'm making time for the kids too, that I'm making time like for my own mental health, that I'm making time for all these other things that like I'm not going to be doing so much of a lot that I'm having a heart attack at 42 or 40. We ain't trying to do that now. But that's like my day to day, a lot.
All right. And then my last question is second to last. What would you say are the biggest like benefits or the best things so far of starting your own shop and being a managing partner? What are the best parts of that?
I mean, the freedom.
Okay.
The feeling of success, which has like eroded the imposter syndrome. Like I don't know, man, like I'm on my deathbed at some point and like I'm looking back on my life like I took control of it. You know one thing that's like really big here? Remember I just told you I'm about to be 42. I don't have any midlife crisis type stuff. Like it's not even like coming up right now because every day is new. Every day is something else. It's exciting. It's not, there's no today is like yesterday type stuff when you're doing kind of like what Lance and I are doing at Hamilton Clarke. And that's been fantastic for my life, right? Like, even though, like, again, there are days that are very hard. There are times that are hard, right? Like where maybe all the money's not coming in because your accounts receivable haven't been received. You see it in the pipeline, but if you're not touching it, your bills are still due. Your bills don't care about the pipeline. So there are definitely times where like it can be a little crazy, it can be a little tight. But all of that said, like, I just feel like I'm living life, man. I just feel like I just jumped off the cliff and like for 9 years, which has been now, I have just avoided hitting the ground. And that is something that's like very self-fulfilling. And
big.
I thank God that like I made that decision 9 years ago. And like the future is just always open.
Right.
Everything's optimistic. I never know what it's going to be, but like that's what makes this so amazing.
Right.
You know, we only get one life as far as I know. Maybe we get a couple, but I'm living it like
Yeah.
this is it until I see otherwise. So,
and fair to say the money's better.
Yeah, the money's better.
if you work hard enough.
If I look back at myself in 2015 and like what was coming in, like at that time when I first left BXD. No, look, we didn't make anything at BXD. Right. So that was the other thing I think that made it a little easy to jump into private practice. I'm like, all I got to do is just make that year one. It's not like I was like leaving Cravath to go start my own practice and like I'm leaving a couple $100,000 on the table. Like, I'm like, I just got to make that. Right. So I can make that. I can challenge myself to make that.
Yeah.
And so then like being able to make that and like some more than that.
Right.
Yeah, it's being able to put the kids in private school and, being able to buy the crib in Bergen County and being able to, support my family. Like my wife, stopped working like a few years ago so that, especially like during the pandemic, which is a crazy time for parents, to be able to kind of focus on the kids and like being able to hold that down, like as a dude holding down like your family financially, like I couldn't have done that at BXD.
Yeah.
Not on that salary, right? So like, all these kinds of things, it's just allowed me more freedom, more control. And I guess if we philosophically breaking it down, just more happiness, even with the hard times that I've had. This business stuff is not easy.
Right.
If it was, everybody would do it. Let me just be very clear. If you guys think about like starting your own shop, if it were easy every day, everybody would do this. But the reason why people get comfortable in the W-2 salaries is because like at least on the 1st and the 15th, you got something. It's not necessarily like that in this world, especially when you're building. But you do start to get to a point where like you can more reliably like see what's coming in. You can see what's in the pipeline. And when you start to get to that place in business, that's kind of cool. When you have a little bit of comfort in like your own freedom.
Yeah. You got any last minute questions for Phil?
Nah, man. He covers everything, man.
So many gems. Cool, Phil. We end every episode. I know you already dropped so many gems, but we end every episode asking everybody to like give their last parting words, some last words of wisdom, some last, some game. So you got anything that you want to leave the people with?
Yeah, as Black men, just what I referenced earlier, I say again and I end on it. Like, we can't do this alone, right? Again, whether it's like you getting engaged to like your soon-to-be life partner, whether it's us trying to like mastermind, like figure out like what the next move is. Like, don't try to like do this on some self-made type stuff. Like, tap into your network, tap into just others that have been there on that path, and deal with brothers that like understand like we got to pay it forward. Right. Not everybody gonna be like me or Lance, and you know it. We met them Black men that just I'm where I am, and I don't need to see you here, right? I like my own space. I'm not that type dude, right? So like, just get some good brothers like in your corner that can kind of help show you the way. Because like my mentors have, I'm here for you too if you need me, and I think that's just can't do it by yourself, bro.
Appreciate that. How about you, Conrad? What you got?
So yeah, my gem is something that I'm coming to a realization now. You're not an imposter, right? You're not an imposter.
Right.
When you get where you're supposed to be, you're there because you're supposed to be there.
Right.
Right? You're there because you're supposed to be there. You put the work in place to put yourself there. And you're just as good as everybody else that's there. So, just...
If not better.
If not better. If not better. So
not everybody could have pulled that off. I don't care if it's the Bronx, Manhattan. I don't care where the case was tried.
Right.
Not everybody can just pull off what you pulled off. That was you.
Right.
Appreciate that. So build on your successes, man. You're not an imposter. Yeah.
Cool. And I'll say something in the same light as what Phil said. I was watching a sermon the other day, and they're talking about mentorship and that relationship between the mentor and the mentee. And the guy made the point that in that relationship, it's on the mentee to pull on the mentor.
It is.
Yes. And I don't think we always think about it that way. Like, we think we have a mentor, it's on them to pour into us and give us all the information, give us all the game. Like, no, as someone who's trying to get into the mentor's position, you're the one that has to seek out that knowledge and seek out that information.
Yeah.
So,
and remember, mentors are doing a lot.
Yes.
And we just talked about that like 5 minutes ago. There's a lot going on.
Right.
So, yeah, you need to be persistent. You need to be like, am I bugging him? You better.
Right.
Because if you're not,
right,
I got a lot of other stuff to do.
Exactly. So my game, I'm speaking to myself, I'm speaking to anybody else who has like a vision of getting somewhere. Find a mentor, find someone who's where you're trying to get to. And then when you find that person, make sure you're reaching out to that person and make sure you're the one that's taking the steps to get that information.
Co-sign that.
For sure. Hey, Phil, you have told us how busy you are, so I'm so happy you were able to, pencil some time in for us. We really appreciate
you.
I'm going to be in touch because I have a lot more questions, and I know you have a lot more information to provide me.
So you want to do that relationship one? I'll come back
for sure.
Hey,
say no more.
Hey. I'll come back.
So. Say no more. We'd love to have you back on, and yeah, I have a lot more questions as far as taking next steps, and I appreciate you taking time to join us.
Yo, I'm here, fellas.
All right, y'all. We have reached the end of another episode of the Brothers-in-Law podcast. Stay tuned. We got some more exciting episodes coming up. And yeah, we'll holler at y'all. Take care, y'all. Peace.